I am so glad that you have chosen to come tonight and be a part of this discussion. It is something that we want as a church to make sure we kind of demystify and make it safe and a good place to talk about issues of depression and how to prevent suicide.
I want to start out by talking to you about your brain. And I think that this might be the most helpful thing that I can share with you today because I'm talking about all of us. Not only the person who might be depressed or anxious or even suicidal that's hearing me, but all of us. We have three brains, and that's, my doctor friend over here is going to hear how simplistic I am, but as a therapist, I really try hard to talk in a really straightforward kind of way. So we have three brains, and they develop at different stages of our development as babies and into adulthood. And the inner brain is the part of our brain that's about this big, and it's in our brainstem. And that's the first part that develops in utero. And that's the part that fights for our survival. It's about hunger and thirst, and about making sure we don't get eaten by a tiger, okay? And the right and left hemispheres come later, a little bit later, and they work together to do much of what else our brain does. Language, numbers, decision-making, processing things. And finally, the cerebral cortex is the part that develops last. We used to think they all happened at the same time, but this isn't fully operational for most people until their early 20s. And it's one of the reasons why teenagers do dumb things, because this part's not fully functioning yet. And it is I would call it the CEO of the brain. It's the part of us that helps us learn how to settle down. It helps us think that maybe we need to not talk right now, wait a little while before we're going to make a better decision, be able to be patient with ourselves. When we get triggered, and I'll talk in a minute about what triggered is, our cerebral cortex essentially goes offline. And we then end up reacting from our inner brain that helps us to survive. And we call that sometimes we call it the reptilian brain, because it's the part of the brain that is most like the reptile. It's smaller. And it's the part that either wants to bite or run away. If you think about a reptile, you can't have a relationship with a reptile the way you can with a dog. And they have those two options. Examples of triggers might be, and I just made these up as general ones, but my boyfriend broke up with me and said mean things about me on social media. I lost my job for the third time in as many years, and I don't think I can stand trying to find another one. I cheated on a test and got caught, and they will call my parents. My treatment for a disease has been going really well, and suddenly I got a huge bad news of a setback. I got humiliated by my boss in a meeting, and it reminded me of how my parents used to ream me out unmercifully when I made a mistake as a kid. Now, those are the ones I just thought of off the top of my head, but you get my drift. When we get triggered, and remember, triggering can be about something huge or something small, the cerebral cortex, if it upsets us enough, goes offline, and we stop having easy access to the slowing down, thinking things through, and being creative in problem solving. The reptilian brain takes over. And sometimes my reptilian brain of either biting or run away, if I run away, biting usually means I sort of fight. But if I run away, I might just take to my bed, or I might get high or drunk. And sometimes it means that I think that the way out of this is for me to hurt myself and even kill myself. So one of the things that I would say is that all of us, I think, need to have an interest in our brain and an interest in the things that we know tend to trigger us. Sometimes shame can be a trigger. So that, as a therapist, I spend a great deal of my time helping clients figure out how they got triggered and what it is that they need to do differently. And to get the whole brain to work together. A lot of what I do is mind-body, mindfulness kind of things to help people to have all their brain access. A person who is depressed and anxious is dealing with triggers all the time. And they experience the dark, bad, hard things that happen to them very intensely. And often it's like a black veil coming down over their face. And the positive, upbeat, hopeful things often don't get through. Because depression is a disease that affects the brain chemicals and makes it so that the brain's not making the chemicals at the level that they need to. This person needs treatment, and that treatment might be some combination of talk therapy and medication. A ways to help their brain be able to work better. So if your family member or somebody you care about is depressed, some of the things that you might notice would be not functioning well at work or at school or at home, not being able to do the things that maybe they once could do very easily, sleeping too much or not enough, eating too much or not enough, acting helpless and hopeless about things that they used to be able to do well, isolating from others, not being interested in things that they were once interested in. And finally, if it gets bad enough, it's not that the person's not trying hard or that they just are not being hopeful enough. If their brain chemistry is really off, it starts to seem logical to them to just take themselves out. Sometimes they'll even say to themselves, it would be so much better for my family or for my friends or for my wife if I just wasn't here. And so even though they may logically not think it makes any sense, their brain starts maybe thinking about the way they would do it. I'm a big advocate for families talking openly as they can about what to do when things go wrong. Talking about being sad or being depressed or even being suicidal is not going to bring this on in somebody. And so being able to have conversations with your children, with your teenagers, with each other, about when somebody that you sense is feeling very down, so that they can have both you can have a sense of being ready to help them, and that this can be something that's normal for them to talk about. So here's my thing that I think all of us, not just therapists and not just teachers and ministers, need to be able to do. As a friend or a family member, I think you have the right to ask the person that you care about, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Now, often you're going to hear back, oh, I would never do that because, that would hurt my family or that would hurt my parents. And then you say back to them, okay, I get that you wouldn't want to hurt them, but are you thinking about it anyway? It's like not allowing the initial no to stop you. Depending on how they respond to those questions, you may be in the position of needing to help them get help. There are and I want to bring up the issue of, there's a large range of responses to suicidal thoughts. A person with a chronic disease who's horribly in pain, or somebody who has a complicated mood or anxiety disorder, struggles with being suicidal often. I have clients that come to see me every week who want to kill themselves every day. They don't do it, but they want to do it every day. That's on this end of the spectrum. In the middle are the sort of middle things, and then on the other end would be people that something happens, like my boyfriend broke up with me and said mean things about me on social media. It feels like at that moment that they make the snap decision to hurt themselves. And I would say many times they really don't want to kill themselves. They just want this to stop. And sometimes they make a mistake and they kill themselves. And sometimes, maybe some of you in this room have lost somebody to suicide. And sometimes people quietly and privately make the decision to end their life. They have the free will to do that. And they don't let anyone in on their thinking. And this is tragic and true, and it happens way too much. I have a lot more that I can say about all of that, but I'll say it in response to questions.
Let's turn now to a doctor and hear you.
Sure. So, as a doctor, someone might present to us, and they might have some depression, but they might not come to us and say oh, doctor, I feel depressed. Can you give me treatment for that? Sometimes they present with fatigue, they feel tired, they just don't have energy, they lost interest in the things that they do. Sometimes they have headache that doesn't respond to the therapy. Sometimes they present with inability to sleep, insomnia. Sometimes they present with pain, with some abdominal symptom, or some chest tightness. So there are so many presenting symptoms that a patient can come to us for. So that's for us, we need to increase our vigilance to kind of be able to recognize that as of course not all of headache or chest tightness or abdominal symptom would be a sign of depression, but we have to kind of be able to recognize better and also to screen our patients better as well. But I would like to invite you as well that if let's say you have a symptom that's kind of unusual, let's say you have asthma and usually with this kind of therapy and that usually respond well, but for a certain period of time it seems not responding as well, whether there's anything bothering you and if the headache is getting more than usual, so try to recognize that symptom as well. That's symptom in yourself, symptom in a family member that could also bring us attention to that as well. There are some medication and also some medical condition that could contribute to depression, that could cause depression or could worsen depression. Some antihypertensive medication for blood pressure, that's one of them. Some long-term use of steroid also possible. Sometimes some treatment for hepatitis, there's also a contributing factor for depression. That's as a side effect. When someone has thyroid problem, has arthritis, HIV, cancer, that could also, those patients are more prone as well to depression. Why people do not come voluntarily and say oh okay, I need help for depression. There could be several factors. One, they might be afraid to be stigmatized. Probably now, the awareness is more. Probably this, hopefully, is not a big problem at this time, but that could be one of the reasons. And also second, they also might be afraid of confidentiality, or let's say they might want to apply for insurance or apply for life insurance, and they might be afraid to be denied, or let's say get higher premium. And also some people might not want to get treatment, they're afraid to get referred to psychiatrists, or they might be afraid to be treated because they heard a lot of bad things or side effect of the medication. So that's why they probably do not come voluntarily and and say that they need help for depression. How we manage depression as a primary care physician, it's really a multidisciplinary approach. It can't be just us, but it has to be many different ways. Of course, counselor play a big role. They're able to talk to the patient, to the people who has depression, and help them understand about the cause and how they can help themselves or help the family members. And also it's also important to increase the activity that increased endorphin. Endorphin, as you might have known, is a substance in our body that could give like good feeling. It's like when someone has marijuana, that's increased endorphin. That's why like people like that sensation of high. But like other than like drug, like a illicit drug, exercise also could increase endorphin. So like that's a good way to do. And keeping yourself busy, like keeping yourself busy, like with preferably like enjoyable activities, or let's say like helping others that are less fortunate. That's also like a great way. And also like always put positive things that we always advise our patient for, because like good things, inspiring things will help. And probably like looking at some other people that face adversities and like rise above the circumstance as an example. That would be a great role model. You probably like heard about like Nick, I don't know how to pronounce, Nick Vujicic, the one that doesn't have arm, doesn't have legs, only like have a little bit, like little leg, but like when he was little, he was trying to commit suicide, but he was able to kind of like get help and also like get better, and now he's actually like helping people to inspire others to overcome their challenges, to kind of like rise above their circumstance, and realize that like God is with us, and like we have someone that's greater than ourselves, that could take care of our problem. Like so we do our part, but leave the rest to God. I think like that's a great way as well. Connect with nature is also a great way. And also like we do prescribe medication, like for depression. And there are many different kind of medication with its own benefit, and probably like some side effect that's like let's say like some of them might have effect of like somnolence, which is like help you sleep. Some people like this might not be a good medication for them, but for some others that might be a good one, because like it could help them sleep. Some, let's say, like might be afraid of like weight gain, but there are other alternatives that like not causing much weight gain. There are some people like could be sensitive with the gastrointestinal tract. So like there are some that could give more side effect, but like some that could give like less side effect. So there are many different types, and like the physician could always work with you to find something that's more suitable for your condition, and also like considering your other need as well. And of course, like for more severe condition, there are psychiatrists that could help, and also like inpatient behavioral health that could also like be an option. There are many other treatment, let's say like electroconvulsive therapy. That's for like people who are more suicidal. That could be an effective way. So like so we work together with other professionals to help the people who have depression. If it goes untreated, then like of course like it could like decrease the quality of life of the person itself, and it could also like affect the family members. It could also increase the risk of suicide, and also like it's affect like the performance in the workplace and also like daily living. So as a physician, like what we try to do is like we try to identify those, and also like what I would invite everybody is like to try to recognize the symptom either on yourself or in your family member or in your friends. Okay.
I'm trying to, I've been thinking about what I want to say that I didn't say this morning or this evening. Many of you were here. If you weren't in church today, if you weren't in worship today, you might go online and listen to that sermon where I talked about the topic a good bit. I also have this blog that I do very occasionally. It's called ReverendTomBerlin.com, all one word. And there's a piece I wrote about suicide some months ago now, and after we had a death here in the congregation. And you can see it has an image of a beach on it. That's how you'll know it's the right one. But what's interesting is the volume of hits that one blog post has received more than anything else I've ever written. And so it's I think it's an important topic. It's one that a lot of us are thinking about. And it's sort of interesting to think that we're sort of arranged like the ancient Greeks thought about the human process. You have sort of the mind, the emotional center, the body, and then the spiritual center. And turns out the Greeks were wrong. We aren't three separate things, we're one thing. And so it's what I'd like you to think about is the blending of the importance of all those things. So when people come into our offices as pastors, one of the things that we're listening for, because it's our vocational space, is sort of what's the health of their spiritual life? Do they have spiritual practices in place? And if they don't, what's going on that they don't? Is that because people don't know it, or because they've stopped attending to them? Because one sign that somebody's really depressed is when they stop attending to the normative practices of the Christian faith. People will drop out of community, they will stop praying, and they will start exhibiting emotions toward God that often might be better directed towards humans in their circle. So they might experience a lot of anger at God. They might experience a lot of feeling of victimization by God about things that have been sent our way, and so on. And so part of what we do is try to hear those things. But your pastors on this staff will almost always, if somebody's exhibiting signs of depression, and the great thing about our conversations in all three areas here is these are all confidential conversations. So my experience is we rarely talk to each other unless someone says, I'd like you to talk to my counselor, and the permission can be given to have that inner conversation. But when we do that, I'll sometimes say to people, when's the last time you had an exam, a physical exam? Because part of what I want to know is something going on physically with them that's affecting everything else. Likewise, I'll say, hey, have you ever had an experience with a counselor? Because a pastor is probably not somebody you're going to meet with once a week or every other week for a whole year. In fact, we have a restriction, your clergy have a restriction by the Virginia Conference. If we can only meet with you three times, our job is not to do the counseling, but to do the referral. So we work with a lot of professionals. Now, I do have folks that I've seen more than 3 times. I've been here 19 years, so it's not like, there's sort of that was 3 times, but now we've got a new 3 times. That happens. That's okay. But my point is this: our job primarily is to try to help you find the other folks, but then try to help you build the spiritual practices that can work toward a healthier outlook on life, and to use your spiritual life, your life in Christ, as a resource into your world. One of the things I want to say really clearly, though, that I haven't talked about this morning, is there's this underlying question that people have in the Christian community, which is in the world at large, which is, if I take my life, or if my loved one takes his or her life, are they going to hell? And this is an ancient question, and it comes especially from the time of St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who were Catholic theologians back in the time when the only option you had in the West was to be a Catholic. And the thought that was developed at that time is that suicide in some ways was the unforgivable sin, and this was the rationale. The rationale was, if you're going to be forgiven of a sin, you have to confess it and repent of it. And if you are dead, you cannot do that. And what's remarkable is that thought was developed hundreds of years ago, and it still lingers with us today, even though I don't know pastors, and frankly, I don't know any priests who believe that. What the church today, and I think I can speak fairly broadly, not just the Protestant church and not just Methodist, but what the church today tends to believe is that, first, God judges and we don't. Second, it is unlikely that a loving, gracious God judges us in a moment when we lack, as I talked about this morning, when we are standing in a fog, and your term was veil, and all you can see is one issue that's as big as everything because you have no perspective on anything else. You have nothing to gauge your problem by all the other things around you because the fog has surrounded you. And so we believe in the church today that that's probably not the one thing that God's going to judge you on. And we also believe that there are probably a lot of sins you didn't confess and repent of. Most notably, those are called sins of omission, which is to say that most of us are so sinful half the time we don't even know we're doing it when we're doing it. And if you think that's not true, go ask some of your friends if you ever say things that they roll their eyes about. And you will find that they do, and they're just polite enough not to do it in your presence. So, now, having said all that, here's what I want to say really loudly. We don't believe in suicide. We don't believe it's a good option. And so the text today was that clear space in Deuteronomy 30 where Moses says, I set before you today life and death, blessings and curses, choose life. And so the church is very much about life and the pursuit of life, but we also want to acknowledge that Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. So part of what we want to do is understand that we are not just spiritual beings trapped in a body, which was an ancient heresy. We're actually whole beings. And if we can be physically healthy, and if we can be emotionally healthy, that will be the integration of who we are with the life and the spirit and the soul that God has given us. And so part of what we work on in the church today is that integration, that desire to have health in all of these areas, and then to listen carefully to the people around us and to have such a strength of community that someone can actually be vulnerable enough to say, I really feel depressed. And when somebody says it, somebody else will actually care enough to say, how can I help you? And that might lead to my office or one of your other pastors. That might lead to a doctor's office. That might lead to a counselor's office. Or it may just mean that you're going to start attending to that friend and speaking to him and doing a lot of things we do here that are called just living the Christian life. Because when people know they're loved and supported, it really does change things. And all these things that we do, they really do matter in the end. But we have to be very attentive because, as you've heard two professionals say, we miss it. We miss it. I've missed it. I've been the responsible professional who was the last professional who spoke to somebody who took their life. And that is a terrible thing. But you have to get to a space, and I hope you just heard what was just said. You have to get to a space where you realize, first, people don't tell me everything. They only tell me what they want to tell me, and sometimes they project in front of me the thing they want me to see, and only that. How are you doing? Great. I'm fine. And so the other thing that I said this today that I would encourage you to think about is it's really important not to carry the baggage of guilt everywhere you go. And as a pastor, I've had to discipline myself over the years. And I've got a bag of guilt that sometimes, I call it my bucket of guilt. Sometimes I go and pick it up and splash it on me and then walk away from it and feel unrenewed. And so I think everybody's got their own little bucket of guilt, but it's really important that we not make that our clothing. Because it'll actually affect how you hear everything, and it'll eventually affect your own mental health and your own spiritual health. So I've learned to forgive those who I love who have taken their life, even though that may sound critical to you and harsh to you. I've had to forgive myself, and I've had to forgive them. And understand that in that moment, they were probably doing the best they could with the cloud of judgment they carried. But it's a very intimate and terrible burden. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. So I think that'll be all I'll say, because I know we want to do some question and answers. And I think the Q&A actually will be really helpful to people.
So first question is kind of the basic question, which you started to touch on, Myra. But what should you do if someone tells you they're thinking about suicide?
Take it seriously. Even if you think the person is doing it to get attention or they're being overly dramatic, I think it's incredibly important to take it seriously and to assume that if somebody says that they're thinking about taking their life, that there needs to be a next step, whether it's asking questions about, tell me, okay, let me sit down next to you. Tell me what you're thinking. What's going on? Sometimes they may be able to say, happened that's really upsetting and I'm scared and I don't know what to do. But you start the conversation rolling and getting them to talk to you about it. I think that you offer the options that you and that person are willing to do. I mean, I think it's different if it's your child or your spouse, perhaps, than it is if it's your friend. But sometimes I'll have somebody that's got a teenager that said they're thinking of killing themselves or that they're just feeling really depressed. And when they suggest, I think we want to take you to see somebody that you can talk to, and they say, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. That sometimes I'll even coach the parents to say, listen, you've now told me this a week ago, and I'm spending all my time worrying about that. So your dad and I and you are going to go together to talk to somebody. Or we're going to go to see our doctor, who we really know really, really well. And we're going to sort of see what she thinks about what the next step might be. It doesn't really matter which order you do those things in. The important thing is that you take a step. And that the most important piece is that you take it seriously. And that sometimes you can offer to go with your friend to the doctor or to a therapist. But that you know that they've trusted you by telling you something that personal, and that it's important to take a step.
Part of that taking it seriously is getting the right language and ask follow-up questions to understand, because sometimes people hint around. I just wish I wasn't here anymore. I wish I didn't exist. So sometimes when I'm talking to people, I'll just stop the conversation and I'll say, it would help me if we had some clarity. And this is about taking it seriously. I'll say, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about taking your own life? And I'm not being flip about it, but I'm being direct. And then they can say yes or no to that. And if they say yes, my next question is going to be, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan for that? Well, yeah, I've thought about have you gathered the means? Those are 3 questions. So I'm saying this openly to the flock here, because I want you to understand that it's really important the language you use, because I have to help you get some help. That's just something I have to do. There's a reporting function in that for a professional. But I'm not going to do it in a punitive way. But it's really important if you get somebody, so get them to say things clearly so that you know where they're at. And if they back off, don't force them. Don't push. Don't put something in their portfolio that's not there. But it's just the clarity is really helpful.
So I have actually 3 questions that say about the same thing right now. How could we help a person who is depressed but doesn't want to get help? One of them says a 17-year-old, the others don't give an age, but I think that is a good question. People come to us and say, so-and-so is depressed, what do I do? And they're resisting help.
I think about that the same way I did about raising my children. I think that as a parent or as a friend, you can be open to hearing what you're in pain about, having a conversation, being the person that sort of, you don't want to be too much into saying, well, you should try this and you should try this, because lots of times if they're feeling bad enough, they don't want to do any of those things. But with my children, I often knew if I was really miserable about something that was going on with them, I needed to use that information to know that I needed to take a next step. And so, it's like kids in junior high school will say to their friend, I'm thinking about taking pills and I've gathered them, but you can't tell my parents. Then that friend is stuck knowing that you've got pills and that they don't, what are they supposed to do about that? And so, my coaching for that friend is, If you really love your friend, you need to either tell your parents or the school counselor or somebody that is in a position to do something. Your friend may never talk to you again, or you may be afraid that your friend is never going to talk to you again, but your friend could be dead. So what I would say in the general way about what do you do about somebody that doesn't want to get help, there's a part about being willing to listen, and then there's a part about saying, I don't think this is going to get better with just you telling me over and over and over again how bad you're feeling. Now, you can't force somebody that's not a minor to get help, other than if you're, I would, if somebody's standing there holding a gun or a knife, I'm calling the police, and they can get taken to the hospital, and we can talk about that process. I've done that. But I think generally that question is probably more about somebody saying they feel terrible but they don't want to do anything. And I think that's part of being depressed, is you feel terrible and you don't want to do anything.
Yeah, I think that's very good point from Mayna. And another thing that I could think of is also probably it's the person, if they trust you, then it's probably great to have some private time with them in a non-intimidating way, that they could kind of share a little bit more with you, and then and if, let's say, if they share with you why they are not willing to get help, then probably an indirect way, we can also telling a story about somebody else, or that's kind of giving them some understanding on what's the benefit of getting help as well. So yeah, be available and gather as many support for the person as possible, and probably from indirect way, try to find out why they are not willing to.
Another thing that occurs to me is that I think a lot of people have a negative idea about what going to a doctor would be or what going to a therapist would be. And so sometimes when, they can look at a therapist's website and see that they don't look weird, they don't have written weird things on their website. Or if you say, let's just go, come on, let's go 3 times. Obviously if you go 1 time and you hate the person, you don't have to go back. But let's just go 3 times so that they don't, I think a lot of young adults and teenagers have this idea that you're some kind of weirdo if you need to go do this, and that they have this weird idea that they're going to have to be forced into. Sometimes they think that the therapist is going to be a replacement for their mother or their father telling them something they're supposed to have to do. And they need to find out that that's not the way it works. But to sort of have this idea that you can go in and you're not going to be stuck there for a year necessarily. That you have some right of refusal if you get there and this hasn't been helpful.
So there's a group of teenagers in the back, and I want to make sure I speak to you, because one of the questions was, especially if they're under 17, I want to encourage you to think about how, you're in that moment and a friend of yours says, I'm going to hurt myself or I'm going to kill myself. And the way the question was written is, if a friend, one of the problems we've got in our society is, what is a friend right now? Because is this a Facebook friend or is this But if it's a friend, you can look at them and acknowledge your own limitations and say, hey, it scares me to think that you might hurt yourself. Is there somebody else we could share this with along with me? Maybe there's a teacher we could share this with. Maybe there's a guidance counselor we could share this with. Would you be willing to share this with my mom or my dad if they know your parents really well, or their parents? And if you would say to them, I'll go with you, what you're trying to do is get them to the next resource, because you don't want to carry this thing on your own. You want to try to help your friend get to the resource. So try to name what the resource would be, and would you be willing to do that? If ultimately they just say no, and they do that, what Myra just described, where they go, no, and you can't tell anybody, don't believe that. Don't believe that. No one has a right to restrict your freedom when their life is in danger, because that would be sort of the equivalent of them falling through the ice, trying to keep buoyant, yelling, don't get help. You just wouldn't do that. You'd go get help no matter what they yelled. And then to adults, what I would say is it's helpful if you will talk with your friends about your own mental health. So I don't talk about it a lot, but I've been to pastoral counselors at different seasons of my life. And I don't, every season is not that season, but several years ago, we had a run of deaths in this church. And one was a child, and one was a father who was my age, who left behind 2 kids and his wife, and just a number of things. So I started going to a pastoral counselor. And I was willing to talk about that from the pulpit because what I want you to know is that's a resource that I seek and that I think is normative, and it's not for damaged people. And it's not for bad people, and it's not for weak people. It's for people. And because of the work that I do, sometimes it's really helpful for me to sit down with a professional and just talk. And you know what the great thing is when you go to a counselor or a doctor, it's all about you. It's awesome. It's so great. It's just really great just to talk and talk and talk. So the point is, it's like not going to your mother or father. It is counseling. But if you will be open about your own stuff, your friends are more likely to see your resources as their resources. And it may not be their counselor, but they'll be willing to be in the process.
All right, I'm getting a lot of questions. So in trainings I've received on this topic, I've heard that the number one indicator for suicide is perfectionism and staying in control. That's why so many suicides seem to come out of the blue. Can the panel speak to how to see these signs? And I think that's another question is, what are the signs? Are there indicators that people, another question I have is it inherited? Can you predict if a certain family is going to be more at risk to these things?
You want to go first? I'll go.
I can answer some, maybe
Okay.
There are some traits that that a little bit more predictive toward suicide, or somebody who is alone, living alone, and then never married. They are a little bit more prone for suicide. Somebody who is isolated, somebody who had abuse as a child, especially, they're also more prone to suicide. People who unfortunately also veterans, they also after they come back they are also a little bit more prone. People who go ahead.
I'll speak to the piece about perfectionism. There's lots of different kinds of perfectionism. The kind that I think this question's talking about is not wanting to do well at some things. I want to get an A on a number of things in my life, and I work hard to get an A on a number of things in my life. I don't think we're talking about perfectionism that, all your white shirts need to be next to your white shirts in the closet. Although that can be a sign of perfectionism. It's more what I would call an unrelenting standard. And that for somebody who has this standard, and as soon as they reach that standard, they don't feel happy about that standard, they just raise the standard. And there's a sense in which they can't get, I sort of think in anything that we learn how to do, we sort of need to be able to get a C+ until we can get a B-. But for some people, that is really, really difficult to do. And so I see clients all the time who, what we're working on is them being able to get a B in some aspect of their life. And that, part of it is that they have, perfectionism is on the anxiety cycle. It's on that line. And so somebody who goes into a loop about, I was writing this thing and I misspelled a word, and so now I have to completely redo this whole page because I got that word wrong. I have clients that are like that. So somebody who's on the anxiety cycle of being a perfectionist will be more likely to judge themselves horribly, not because they cheated on a test, which could be sort of big, or they lost their job, but even that, they thought they were going to get first in violin and they got second chair instead. And their life is just, it feels like it's over. So again, I think that's depending on how far over you are on the spectrum, that's something that can be helped with some kind of talk therapy and sometimes with medicine. And it is very predictive.
If someone threatens repeatedly, but does not do it or denies the attempt, how do you react?
Read that again.
If someone, I believe the question is saying, if someone repeatedly says they are going to take their own life, but they don't, how do you respond each time?
Well, I think sometimes I see it with kids with their parents. If you don't let me do da-da-da-da, I'm going to kill myself. If you do that to me or make me do that, I'm going to kill myself. And I think that's part of what needs to happen in that conversation with the parents, whether you do it on your own or you get somebody in family therapy to help you do it, is, how do we sort of, that's like somebody has to go from 0 to 60 awful fast, and that they don't know how to say, you're making me miserable and I want you to stop doing that. How do you help them have a conversation that they don't have to go to that extreme? Because I do think it's if it's something about somebody that you know that person, and you're a little bit trusting your instinct that you're going to be able to know whether they're, I call it being held hostage. You don't want to be held hostage by that. But I think that when somebody over and over and over again holds you hostage and you're not able to somehow do something different in the conversation with them to get them to try something different than that, like, I'm really mad at you and I'm going to talk to you in a loud voice about how mad I am, is way better than saying you're going to kill yourself. But if you're not able to help it, I think sometimes somebody, like me can help change that conversation.
I'm thinking about how these questions, the answers are different depending on your age.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're a 15-year-old in the back corner, or a younger, or a little bit older, and you've got a friend who does this a lot, who uses "I'm going to kill myself" language, there are people that use that extreme language, and it's a way for them to signal, I don't know how to cope right now. And I don't mean cope like they are actually suicidal, but they don't know how to manage the conversation in such a way to get to a productive outcome. And if a friend of yours is doing that and you're that age, eventually what you have to do is create a boundary for them. And you have to look at them and say, please don't use the expression, I'm going to kill myself, in a way that's not true. And if you choose to do that, I need to go get some help. Because I can't carry that on my own because I'm 15, By the way, if you were 35, you wouldn't want to do it then either. So I think it's really important if you're a teenager and you've got a friend who's doing this thing about I'm going to kill myself, you really have to draw the boundary. Tell them, let's go get the help. If they refuse, say, I'm going to have to bring the help to you. And if you do that, if you call them on it, eventually they will learn a new way to communicate distress that's not really about suicide, but is about dysfunction.
On the other hand, I will say, even though the person repeatedly telling but not doing, I will assess how serious is the person, because even though many times they didn't do it, but if that thought is always there, and like Tom said that do you have a plan? Have you gathered the means? I will say I will take it seriously, and will not just dismiss because the person hasn't done it in the past.
Okay, thank you. In addition to that, Tom, you started talking about teenagers. I have a question that says, I'm a teenager. I have an adult in my life who tells me they have a plan. How do I help an adult who doesn't want to listen to a teenager?
How do I help an adult who
doesn't want to listen to a teenager?
I think you don't carry that by yourself. I think you go to somebody else and say, I'm scared about my mother. Or was it an adult? Just an adult. Somebody, I'm scared and I need your help. You can go to somebody. I'd go tell Tom.
you could do that.
I'd go tell Tom.
You can
or
do that.
I would tell my next door neighbor if I trusted them. Or I would tell my aunt or uncle. But that you don't, that is a, it's a damaging burden to carry.
If you're a teenager and an adult is telling you, I'm going to take my life, and you're trying to become their counselor, you're already in a totally dysfunctional space. So you should identify it as that. That's not normal. Adults don't do that normally. People don't do that normally. Doesn't matter if they're adults or not. So this is this thing about find the resource. And they don't get to hold you emotionally hostage by saying you can't tell anybody. Go tell somebody. That may be somebody at school, that may be one of us at the church, that may be one of these people sitting right around you right now that are the counselors in the youth group, but tell somebody.
What resources exist for me if I cannot afford to pay a counselor?
Okay, I'm so glad I prepared for this one. I can't afford to pay a counselor can have different levels. This county, Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Manassas County, has mental health services for people who don't have insurance and who can't afford to pay for it. The pastoral counselors that I know I don't know the person that's associated with your church, but a lot of churches have somebody like that, and they have as part of their mission to see people on a sliding scale.
That we have what she's describing here at Floris. They're on a sliding scale. They get to use our facility for free, and in return, they work on a sliding scale.
And even people like me, who this is my way of making my living, I know of no therapist who don't take some low fee to no fee. And I am much more likely to take it if Tom calls me and says, Myra, will you see this person? And I want to be nice to Tom, and so I would probably take that. Now, I can't take 20 people.
That's actually a really helpful piece of information.
Right. And, and if Tom were to call me and those spots for me are filled, I would give him the names of some other therapists that are good who would have those slots. And you may not know that your health insurance, if you have health insurance, does pay something. And if you're something like Blue Cross Blue Shield, and you call me and because you looked on my list and you say I'm not on those panels, but I know the people that are. And so, I think many therapists are willing to be a referral to somebody else who might be on a panel that they're not on.
A lot of people start with a pastor not because we're so wise, but because we are, in fact, free. And so that's good. So if you've got a friend and they say, well, I can't afford a counselor, I would prefer you not bring all your friends, you get I'm being very careful about what I say. If you have a friend that's absolutely in this level of distress, you absolutely could call one of your clergy. We don't charge. But what we'll do is start this referral process that Myra's describing, and we'll help them figure out a place to go and somebody get to. And the county really does have resources, and there are always more resources than people are aware of. See, part of what's happening in that situation is the person is feeling a lot of emotional distress, so they are narrowing down and they can't see there's actually a lot more abundance around you than you know. And so that's where another professional can help them.
And when you feel terrible, the thought of making 10 phone calls is just overwhelming. And so you don't want to make 10 phone calls. You call somebody that you think of as being your connection so that they can help you narrow that down.
Along those, my 16-year-old appears very depressed, but the stigma of the label prevents him from even acknowledging he is depressed. How can I help him? Well,
I like the idea of if I'm that person's mother, which is not going to be, my poor children have had a therapist for a mother their whole life. I mean, they've had to put up with that. But I think you being able to, when Tom talks about talking about your own mental health, I think that that's very normalizing. And one can have if I lost my brother when he was 43, and I was really sad for kind of a long time after it. And I had already gone to see a therapist when he got sick, so I was already set up. But even if I hadn't gone to see somebody, I might have just been sad for a while. And then it's, grief and sadness often look similar. Depression and grief can look similar. But bad things can happen to us, and then we can sort of come out of it. When you know that you need, when it's affecting your chemicals is when you think about that list that I told you about, isolating and not eating and eating too much, and some of those things that show that it's gone into a more of a body chemical kind of way. But when you can talk about, there's lots of different kinds of being sad and being depressed, and this is, let's not make this be more than you think it is, and being able to have a conversation about that. And I also think that, the whole thing with the teenagers in the back, I think sometimes we don't have to overshare about this. Being depressed and going to see a doctor or a counselor or your pastor that's something, I don't think that's a secret, I think that's being private. And we all have the right to privacy. And nobody has to know about it. And you as a mother are not going to share that. And that they have the right to not share that with anybody if they don't want to.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And part of what if I had that teenager, and I can just tell you, if you're raising teenagers, it's just difficult. It's not that the teenagers are difficult. It's that the family system is difficult. And you're just trying to figure that out. Like we have 4 children, as you know. My wife and I would be the first to say, we're just not the world's greatest. We're not in line for best mom and dad of the century. That's not who we are. And I wish I was, but I really care about them. And so if I noticed that one of them was really depressed, first, God bless you that you noticed. Seriously, because they can fool you. They can absolutely fool you. And sometimes we're so close to them, we don't notice when they start to isolate. We don't notice when their affect becomes blank. We don't notice even when their grades start slipping and sports check. Sometimes you're so close to it, it just erodes so loosely you don't see it. But if you see it, one thing that you might consider doing is to say, a lot of counseling is family-based. It's a family systems type thing. So what you might say is, hey, our family's not doing that great, and your dad and I would like you to come with us to some counseling. Because the truth is, a lot of kids are taking cues from their parents. And they don't want to go because the truth is they know, they can tell you're a little bit wigged out about it. But if you say, hey, we're having a little thing, our family's having a hard time, we're going to go do this. It's Thursday at 3. I wouldn't tell your friends if I were you. And then as a parent, would you please not tell all your friends that your kid is going to counseling? Because guess what? Their friends, they tell their kids, and then your kids has this problem. And this is the difference. This is about privacy and confidentiality and honoring hard things. So if you get them there, that's something that ought to be honored with your family. And it doesn't have to be a thing.
And to your comment about family systems, people who have been trained that way, when they get the whole family in, it's not about the quote identified patient. The teenager is not the messed up one. Nobody is the messed up one. We all are in this together. We're trying to figure out how we talk about it. We're trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And so when the teenager gets into that setting, they will quickly figure out that this is not some trick when really it's, mom and dad and everybody's going to be piling on to the kid.
Yeah.
That's not the way it's going to work.
But beware, mom and dad, you've got to participate.
Yeah.
Like you can't get in the office and and it's her, you really...
You could, but it's just not going to work.
Depression, yeah, that's true. Depression is symptomatic quite often of something that's happening in the broader system.
All right. If someone says they are considering suicide, what are some things that you don't say or do?
It's not that bad. you just need to take a walk. You're just looking on the dark side of things. You need to sort of lighten up. Anything that's, I just think saying, tell me more about that. I really care about this. Let's sit down. But you don't want to do anything that's dismissive, and you don't want to do anything that makes the person, because that's what I meant when I talked about all of our brains. Because when your child says, I'm thinking about not being here, your cerebral cortex stops working and you go into fight or flight. Why wouldn't you? You're terrified. And that's when you don't want to say something that's dismissive. So I would have a tendency to sort of sink to the chair and breathe for a minute and then say, thank you so much for telling me we're going to talk about this. But what you don't want to do is be dismissive, but to recognize that this is really, your brain needs for you to breathe so that you can get all the parts back working, so that you can just be present with the person and try really hard. Now, sometimes we all say dumb things. And so then you have to say, okay, I am really sorry I said that because you just scared me to death. But let's just sit here and hold my hand for a minute. We're going to breathe until I can sort of think about what I'm going to say to you. I'm very big on parents apologizing. I'm quite good at it, so I sort of advocate it. But that sense of you being able to calm yourself down so that you don't be dismissive and say, at the end of that conversation, they need to know that you're going to be doing something with them that's going to be a next step.
And don't go for the quick fix. Don't go for well, you know what you need to do. Now, if you know what you need to do is sort of like, hey, can I help you get to a resource? Can I help you share this more broadly with a family member or a trusted friend or whoever? But, if they say, why would you want to take your life? Well, because my grades are down, I'm behind on my work. Oh, well, we can catch up. Just understand that if somebody's really threatening to take their life, there is a giant black hole in their life that you and I aren't going to fix with 2x4s and duct tape. And so part of what we want to do is honor that and help them get to the resource where they can really start thinking about what's going on in their life. And then don't, I'm speaking in negative, so it's going to become a double negative. Don't not take them seriously. Because sometimes what people do is they go, probably didn't mean it. And you just have to take this thing seriously. If somebody says, I'm going to take my life, you must honor the amazing thing it is to admit that out loud. That is the most intimate thing that anybody can admit out loud to you. And so you have to really treat it delicately and kindly and say, okay, I'm going to take that seriously now. And then act on it.
Does postpartum depression often just turn into depression, and what's the best way to come out of that?
I think the postpartum depression, the question is like, what's the best way to come out of...
Does it always turn into regular depression?
Okay.
And how do you come out of it?
Okay. Someone who has postpartum depression, they are more prone to have depression later on in their life. And to me, like, I don't really see any difference in treating the depression that comes after the postpartum depression with the other regular depression. So like, I think like we still have to go like a multi-resources. It's just like identifying it, like identifying it is like, I think like it's a key component to it. Do you have anything to?
What I think about postpartum depression is that, I think sometimes that you as a family member or a friend can be very helpful about helping that person get rest, because I think sometimes that can be a trigger that can sort of put them into that. But postpartum depression can be, is serious, and people take their life with that. And so again, it's the question of, if somebody in my life has postpartum, or I did, I would want to go to see a doctor about it to sort of find out whether or not this is something that I can just, eat better and sleep better, and whether or not I'm going to slowly, or if it's continuing, I think you don't want to risk it. So, yes, you want to be helping the person to be able to get some sleep while the baby's sleeping and those kinds of things that you do to help young mothers, but I do think people often have suicidal ideation as part of postpartum, and you have to treat it the same way you would do with any other kind of depression.
This is from someone who is in a very difficult place right now, and they say that suicide is selfish, and so I won't do that, but how do I make people understand how much pain I'm in?
I don't know, though, whether how do I make somebody understand how much pain I'm in means that you don't have somebody that seems to be taking your pain seriously. Because I think if I'm running, if I'm going to this person and I keep sort of running into a brick wall of not getting something, or that well is empty, I think I'd choose a different well. I would, is it possible for you to talk to somebody different than that person? And I appreciate very much that you're saying that suicide is selfish. I'm not sure I would use that judgmental word, but what I would say is that when you kill yourself, the people that love you will never get over it. And that's very true. It's the most hard thing that I know of to get over. To live, you don't get over it. You have a hole in your heart for the rest of your life. But what I would say is that I would go to somebody different to talk about it if the people around you aren't getting it. Or if maybe it's that you aren't, that you need to try a different set of words. If you're using the same words over and over again and that's not getting through, you might say to the person, I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know how to describe it to you. Maybe could you help me come up with the language so that we can have a conversation about it.
Another thing that I would add is probably like get a little bit more clear idea on like what you're hoping to get help with, or like what can make you feel better. So like with that clear idea, if you convey to the other person, they might be able to, you are in great pain and like how you can be helped. Like different people like has different need. Like so if you convey to that person or like to another person that might understand better, so they might be able to help you better and understand you better by conveying, like by knowing what you are, by knowing what you need and like how you can be helped.
The other thing I would say is that if you Google suicide, some very good hotline things will come up. And I would sit with my friend or whoever the person is that I'm trying to have understand. And the American Association for Suicidology has a great website. I'm not sure whether that's the first one that comes up, but it will talk about this is what it feels like. This is what's going on with this person. So I think you could say to the person, that's it. That's what it is that I'm feeling.
One of the things, can you read the question again, Barbara? Can you find it? I've done her job, and what you do is you're always looking at the next question, and so when somebody like me says, can you read that again? You're like, no.
Suicide is selfish, and I don't want to cause pain to my family or friends. How do I make people understand how much pain I'm in?
Okay, so if you are going to family and friends and you are saying, I'm in a lot of pain, and you're even using the word suicide, what I want you to think about is you're in a system. And if you go to different points in that system, I wish this was turned on its side, but you're going to different points in that system, and everywhere you go, people are going, I don't get it, what do you complain about, what's the big deal? I love this, that well's dry, okay? The way I would another way to think about that is, it may be that the people in your system don't have the emotional capacity to manage that level of hardship. This is pretty complicated stuff. So I would encourage you to go into a different system. And that might be a professional system. So if you walk into any of these offices or people that hold these offices and you say, I am considering I'm considering taking my life, they are instantly going to say, I am taking you seriously. But if this system doesn't do that, stop saying it to this system, because it's not going to do it because you say it louder, usually. So go into that professional system, because when you walk into one of our offices and you say, I'm going to take my life, now here's what you need to be ready for. We're actually going to say, well, then let's talk about what you're going to do next. Because once you open that box and you say it to a professional, they absolutely have to act on it. So this is where being careful with our words and our terminology becomes really, really important. But my goodness, if you're in a system where you're saying it louder and still nobody's hearing you, that's not going to work. And just be okay with that. And you don't have to hate them or be angry at them. They just may not have the capacity to manage that. And you can forgive that and come over here, and then maybe you'll come back here eventually. But
can you talk a little bit about what to do when multiple conditions exist, like anxiety and depression, eating disorders and depression, cutting and depression?
I will be happy for my colleagues to answer that question.
Ask me the beginning, what do I do? How do I handle that? Can you read the beginning part of the sentence again?
Mm-hmm. 1 second.
I'm doing that thing, Tom.
You're doing that thing. Can you talk about if you do handle it differently when multiple conditions exist?
I almost never get ones where multiple things don't exist. That's just so common. Those things come in a cluster. So, if you're in my office, how I'm handling that is recognize, and we would talk about how those coexist, and that we're starting, the medicine that you would use to help with one is also going to help with that other one often. And so we're looking at it as a total. And sometimes, for example, cutting, which we can go through times when that feels like an epidemic. Cutting is sometimes somebody's way of managing the pain, because physiologically, when you cut yourself, for a little while you feel better, which is one of the bad things about it. It doesn't solve anything, but for a really little while it feels better. And somebody who's an eating disorder, if you don't eat and you withhold food from yourself, or you throw up, when you throw up, you actually for a little while feel better. When you drink alcohol or use marijuana or some other kind of prescriptive drugs, that gets to be a problem in and of itself, but for a little while you feel better. So I don't think you have to decide, okay, we have to do the cutting first and then we'll do the eating disorder. I think you go to somebody who is going to deal with that as a syndrome of problems.
Okay. Do you believe, and you gave some statistics this morning, has depression in fact increased in the past 50 years, this one says, and then another one says, especially for teens in the last 10 years or so? And if so, why? And can we be doing something different?
You want to go first? You want to go?
Yeah, I'm curious. I've got an answer, but I'm curious if I'm right, so I'd prefer you to.
I'm not sure I have the right answer. So much of what we see now is because we talk about these things now. So I do absolutely believe that some of the knowing about it is because there is not the stigma that there used to be about mental health issues. We really used to think about that as a moral issue. If somebody was depressed or anxious, maybe somebody would say, oh, this person is nervous, or, we would talk about how somebody had they had to go to the hospital for some sort of, and we just didn't talk about it because there was a lot of shame associated with it. So I do know that part of it is, although I think there is still a stigma. I think in this area we tend to be a lot more educated about it. So, but I also think that we live in a more complicated world, and the pressures that we deal with. Those of us who tend, and I'll include myself in this, those of us who tend to feel things deeply, I'm a really sensitive person, and I sort of don't think that's a mean thing to say about myself. I feel things really deeply. And I am much more prone to anxiety and depression because I feel things really deeply. I also think it makes me a good friend and an interesting person, and I'm a little artistic and musical and all those things, but it does make me more likely to be anxious or depressed. And we live in a world that's much more complicated, and I think particularly for teenagers, we don't allow very much of B-. There's just so much of how we are supposed to be really, really good at everything. So I do think that we see more of it, but I also think that we're not as secretive about it. And I don't know the statistics.
I'd agree. I think psychology, the framework of psychology is really new compared to the culture as a whole. So, it's late 1800s, early 1900s when this was being developed. World War I is really seminal because that's when the first time people started identifying what then was called shell shock, what we would now call PTSD, and people are starting to think about the psychological effects of warfare. And so you've got this sort of evolution of acceptance. And I think that we're at the high end of the evolution of awareness. And so that could have the appearance that, wow, more people have depression, but the other piece is the development of pharmacology. So that you've got drugs that people use to treat mental health. Well, that's a very recent thing. I mean, that's backed, they're really, anything that we would today consider fine-tuned is only about 20, 30 years old. It's only in recent times, in the last 40 years, that pastors receive what's called clinical pastoral education, where you do rotations through a hospital, and there's a debriefing and a conversation around this, and we take classes on pastoral care. So all that's really pretty fresh when you look at a timeline of civilization, which is why you may feel like that's causal when it's really not. It's more just about awareness and what people are dealing with. But I'll tell you this, it's better. It's better that people can say, I'm depressed, and have a framework for it and have a way to talk about it and have vocabulary around it and have professionals that you can go to. And isn't it interesting that you can go to any of these offices and we're all like, yeah, let's talk about that and let's help you get help. That's better. That's a better time.
So we're almost out of time. And I have a lot of questions that I didn't ask. And I know that. I've tried to combine them a little bit. But I have two more things. I think this one is for you that a few people have asked. It says, why does God let us feel this way?
Why does God let us feel this way? Because it would be very hard for you to feel great exhilaration and joy if you couldn't feel deep sorrow and anger and sadness. And it may be that God wants you to be in community. God wants you to be in community with the Holy Trinity. It's hard to live this life. I was in a refugee camp one time in Sierra Leone and just realized that at the end of that day I was absolutely depressed. And then we had the pleasure of sitting in about 100-degree heat at 11 o'clock at night on a hotel roof, which did not exactly lift my spirits when for the fourth night in the row they played the same soundtrack at the hotel next door at a discotheque that had the same songs at the same time, much of which was Michael Jackson, with all due respect to Michael Jackson. By the fourth day, it was really a little much. It was like, oh, Thriller, it must be midnight, And I remember sitting on that roof and just feeling such despair. And then I realized this is what God feels like a lot. Because my despair was not about, Tom said world. It was about real suffering, real human suffering. And the world has brokenness. It has sin. And some of that brokenness is in your own life. And it's quite often through sorrow and despair that we discover the wounded presence of God amongst us. It's where we actually do our deepest theological work and our deepest spiritual work. But if your big goal in life is to always be, let's be happy, and you're angry at God whenever you're not, it's going to be hard for you to really be deep. Because deep people can experience this, but it's also important not to live in depression. So experiencing sadness, experiencing sorrow, experiencing depression is very different from living there. And it's when we take up residence in that space and build a home there, that's when we have a problem. So I think God allows us to have an array of emotions because God wants us to have an array of experience, because that's really what your life is about. And only if I have experiences of deep sorrow can I help you when you experience deep sorrow. Only if I see despair can I help you when you feel despair. And what God wants me to be is a servant and a vehicle of love and compassion. Frankly, people that don't ever feel things deeply aren't very compassionate. In fact, in their worst form, they are so self-focused that they suffer from, what's that word? When you're so self-focused, narcissism. And so I think God lets us do this. Now, again, I think when you experience deep depression, and there are people in our church who have such deep depression, it's an everyday thing. You just heard Myra talk about a little while ago about somebody who comes to her office and every week says, I'm still thinking about killing myself. That's different from what I'm talking about. That's someone who really needs help from a doctor, help from a counselor, and ongoing. That's not something I think God did to them. Another question might be, how is it that God allows bad things to happen to good people, like chemical imbalances in their brain where they experience depression all the time? That's a question of theodicy, and it's a very hard question, but I'll tell you this. What's really hard is if you live that way and you have no community, and you isolate yourself from God and from other humans. So, there's some answers I don't know. I don't know why kids die of cancer. I got a list for the Almighty that's so long, you don't have time for it. And I share the burden of your frustration. But I believe that God is with us. And I'm comfortable with my own experience of depression and pain. I've made peace with it. Because it's the one thing that helps me understand people when they walk into my office. And I don't call myself a depressed person, but I have been depressed. I've experienced depression. I've experienced the full range of mental health issues. And I just think it's part of the package. And there's an odd beauty in that. There's an odd beauty in embracing the woundedness of life in the world so that then you can love others. Does that answer? Did you answer that? Did I answer that question?
I think so.
Okay, good.
I just want to add one little piece.
Okay.
There's a long tradition of people talking about the dark night of the soul that goes back into ancient tradition. And, it was a way of looking at, really, they would call it melancholia, but they were looking at feeling down and feeling sad and discerning where they were going in their life as having that dark element, and that you came through it. I'll just tell you, I'm changing these details. I have a 23-year-old client who came to see me 6 months ago, and she was drinking a bottle of vodka every day. Every day. She has a pretty crazy family. And crazy in the sense of it's almost not healthy for her to have to live there. But, walking through her dark night of the soul, and getting to the place where she's not drinking a bottle of vodka every day, and she's in a 12-step program, and she has a sponsor, and she's putting her life back together. And one of the wonderful things, and why I love what I do, is that not every time is there a happy ending. And I'm not trying to say she's only 23, she's got a lot going that she has to still figure out, but she's not doing it by drinking a bottle of vodka every day. And when you can begin to think about your sadness as having something that there is some meaning to this, and it's your job, however you're going to do it, to figure out what the meaning is. Not that I don't think God gives us to us, I don't think God says, okay, Myra's having too happy of a life, let's give her this. That's not how I experience God. But there is some meaning in it, and it is to figure that out.
So let me add on to that. This dark night of the soul, and I hope I've got this right. By 8 o'clock in the evening on a Sunday, my brain is beginning to rapidly lose track. But I believe that's St. John of the Cross. And I give you that name because you ought to read. You ought to read the work. And it is other, fathers and mothers of the church. But the conversation there was about sometimes God comes in the form of a spirit of consolation. And consolation is like times when you feel oddly encouraged. It's like the one I talked about today in the sermon where I call a friend of mine. He's like, did my wife tell you to call me? And I'm like, no, but what if God did? Wouldn't that be cool? That's a spirit of consolation. But St. John said there is also this thing called the desolation, the spirit of desolation of the spirit. That sometimes God feels very distant. And what is to be embraced in that moment is our hunger for God. And the acknowledgement that if God is not in my life, all is lost. And what he said is, if we can feel that lostness, we will long for God all the more. We will be more fervent in prayer, and we will seek God more deeply. And when we feel that we are restored in our communion with God, it will actually move us from the level that we're at to a new level of experience with the presence of God. The same way, if you have a friend and you go through a rough spot and then you reestablish the friendship, it's a much deeper friendship. And what he was saying is, you can't live your friendship with God always at the same level. So sometimes encouragement will take us to a new level, but sometimes desolation will take us to a new level. And his point was, embrace it either way.
One of the questions that a few of you asked is, how do I find a good therapist or counselor? And luckily, Myra has agreed to help me put a list together with some names of therapists or counselors you might want to use. Here at Floris and Restoration, Tom and myself and Tim and Nadeem and Ashley would all be willing to be a resource to you and talk to you. As Tom said, we've got 3 times each, but we might be able to help refer you to someone. So we would be very happy to do that.